Yep. Thank you, Dave. Right. Dion.
I did say I had two questions, but
You did?
I'll come back to this one. Do you want to deal with this first?
Yeah, let's just resolve the wording. If I can see it. Thanks, Dave. Right. So the way we've resolved that issue is to get rid of 5 and move that into effectively a subject, make it subject of the report. So the report requested will identify what programs of work could be paused, and that's clearly read in light of F, which is the go faster bit. So what are we going for? What are we still continuing with? And therefore, what can we pause in light of the rest? Right. So that comes back to this committee from chief executives. We're all nodding. We're all yep. Okay. I don't know how to handle that procedurally in terms of move because it's already been moved and seconded. But yep.
Chair, I'm happy with the amendment. Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect. And the seconder is too. That's fantastic. Right now, questions. Dion, you had questions?
So I did have another question, and sorry, I didn't. I mean, I only saw this earlier, so as the time was going on, I was just trying to think of it. Now I'm just putting my regional hat on here, and it's in point 2B. And I would be remiss not... Is it 2B? Yeah. I'd be remiss not to ask this question from a regional perspective. The sub-region of Greater Christchurch is a very, very important and very powerful voice for advocacy for certain things. And I just am questioning what would be the intent or the point in wanting to dilute that Greater Christchurch potential voice, especially when we're talking about some of the work programs that this Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee has done in the future, and also reflecting, this is primarily the takiwā of Ngāi Tua Huriri as well. So I just wanted to get a little clarity on that, because I don't want to dilute the voice of that within a Greater Christchurch thing, because I'm quite concerned about what would happen with other voices in the region, such as the South Canterbury voice block, having a larger influence potentially than we would. So if you get what I mean there, I'm just sorry. It's probably a question to ask of the person who's put this up, and I just want to make sure, because I'm seeing these politics play out at that regional level at the moment, and I don't want to lose influence and power here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what I'm asking for is to bring back a report on the merits. So it's not saying let's do it. It's bringing back the report on the merits. And without doing that investigation, we don't know what that looks like. I think in the line of work that we have in front of us for the next couple of years, it's actually a bit bigger than just us in this room. And there are bigger conversations that we need to have. I know that the conversation of shared service comes up a lot. And if we're having conversations here that are excluding other people, I'm just not entirely sure that's the right governance structure. But what I'm not saying is get rid of the governance structure for our metropolitan function. So that needs to remain within the metro function. That is a key role that stays there, to not dilute the metro function, because that doesn't involve some of our other partners. But there are going to be different conversations that we have around spatial planning that are going to include other people. And for Selwyn and Waimak, we are further out than just our metro functions. So we have other considerations to take into place in this. And so that is why I'm asking for the merits to come back in that report.
Any other questions? Victoria.
Thank you. I'd like to reference the Martin Jenkins report that was done on that independent review, which was a substantive piece of information with some very useful material. Can we safely assume that the Chief Executive Advisory Group will use that document to inform this next piece of work that they're doing, please? I don't want to leave anything to assumptions, so I needed to ask that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, that is the intention and the vision in this. I think that the CA group would be working from this, because this is the whole basis that this resolution has come from, is the Martin Jenkins report that was commissioned. And there are fantastic findings within that. So that is the intention.
Thank you very much.
Kale.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. Just for clarity and carrying on as well from Chair Swiggs, I just want to make sure that when this review comes back, that there's a clear understanding that while Tront, Te Rūnonga Ngāi sits in that sort of level of mural, Burham, that when you come to regional, that's where you need to be. Mana whenua is mana whenua papatipu, and that there is, bless my lovely cousins Tuhuri, who I do whakapapatu, there are more of us in that, and so that really needs to be made sure that that's clear in that review as well of how that engagement's going to happen. Kia ora.
Dan.
Sorry, something I
Oh,
should have. Sorry, who you go?
No, I do have safe, but
I was just going to say something I was going to add before that I would like considered in this with our CEs is what the forum is for elected members to come together with mana whenua as well, because that has been one of the strengths of this body here. It has been the ability to bring elected members and mana whenua together. So how we strengthen that, whatever future structure, it's something that does need to be considered. There's and the broader ones across Canterbury, as has been talked of, especially with the reform program that we've got underway, having those conversations that aren't just at this level, not just at mayor's level, but actually incorporate and include others in that are part of it. And that's the value of bringing elected members together. I don't want to lose sight of that in this review.
Yep. Sophie.
Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation, so it's good to have it. I mean, it's great that the main point of this would be reducing duplication at a time when we're all trying to save money, and we know that the changes, the reform basically means that we've got to change a bit of direction and we've got to think wider. But the main point I just wanted to make was around recognising the power imbalance that already existed as far as between territorial authorities and regional councils and mana whenua already existed, and it's just getting strengthened by these reforms. So it's really good to see that the motion says in C, partnership with mana whenua. But when we get to because somebody who is also pre-settlement told me the other day that it was like they'd been expecting this, so they're not even that surprised that stuff is changing, because it always changes and you always lose out, or you feel like you lose out and you've got to fight out. So in terms of partnership with mana whenua, I think we've got to try and remember that it is partnership, not stakeholding. And also, if this is going to turn into a bit of a regional model for around how the spatial planning work goes, it would be lovely if the report could also consider how much representation by mana whenua there is, because there are, is it the 10 papatipurunga in Waitaha?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't actually want to be one mayor, one mana whenua. We've got actually quite a few. In our area, obviously, we spend most of our time working with Ngāi Te Rua Hiki Taumatu. So it would be great to see how that is considered in there as well. Thank you.
Councillor Lamont.
I feel the work of the GCP is obviously fundamentally important to our future. And this discussion possibly is about honing in and having a focus on our future. Always, we must never forget why we are here and who we represent. We represent our people and our greater region. We need to continue to collaborate where possible and bring the people with us, and that includes mana whenua. We must continue to be cautious about reducing our decision making to a few on such fundamental issues that will shape our future. We can't be Trumpian, rather let's be focused on what GCP can achieve. Where can we move the dial with GCP? Personally, I think that sits with transport, with MRT, PT, and the Greater Christchurch Transport Plan.
Anyone else? Oh, Dion.
Yeah, I'll say it. Not question this time, but
No.
I will cautiously support this. I respect and honour the past that GCP has had, and starting from the UDS, and especially post-earthquake, the actual importance that the partnership had. And I understand, over time things need to evolve and things need to change, and we are in a very much of a flux at the moment. My biggest caution here is, by the time we get to the next meeting, which is, I don't know, June, we will likely see a piece of legislation in Parliament around the future of regional councils and the future of the governance arrangements. That process is in play, and I do feel a caution that we will get to a point and then that advice will be completely different, potentially. So we need to be ready to adapt to that if we get to the point where we get to within whatever the legislation signals us to be. So, yep, cool that we're thinking about this and thinking about what that means for regional spatial planning. My thing is here, and I'll repeat it again, regional spatial planning needs to be in the front of our minds, but that's for our entire region. And I know that there are people in the sub-regions want to see different things happen within that spatial plan, and we in Greater Christchurch need to be very careful about how we navigate that, because we do not want to lose the influence of the powerhouse of this part of our economy in our region. And we want to be making sure that the eyes on the investment that we need, and that we've been signalling, and I take the points that were said for many, many years. Oh, no, that's not it. That's it over there. But the transport, and we need to be leveraging that transport-orientated urban development. That's what we should be leveraging in this urban environment. So good to see that we're not going to stop that. Thank you very much for making those amendments. But I'll cautiously support this, but I will signal that it will likely change when it comes to seeing us in June. So be aware of that, because legislation will finally give us the direction that we need about what we'll be looking like in the terms of the governance of how the Resource Management Act will be playing out.
Victoria.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, for your allowance for us to be flexible today in this meeting environment, because it's actually shown, I think we've landed somewhere that everybody can live with. As is often in our environment, it's, we can't get a perfect solution, but I applaud my colleagues for bringing the best intentions forwards to work together for the region. So thank you for that. And to my mind, it nullifies the need for a great deal of debate, other than to say, really happy to support this and thank you for bringing it. I think what's been shown today reflects the very iterative nature of the environment in which we are currently living in. Where we are today is different from a couple of months ago, and probably different to where we'll be next week. And so picking up on those comments from Dion, when this comes back to us, more pieces will have landed. But for now, this is a sensible solution that allows the key work programs to continue for now, with some good advice on where to go. So City Council's happy to support this. Thank you.
I think this is my third term sitting around this table, and some things have changed. The winds have changed many times over that period. And the things that have remained are what we have up here in this resolution. And we have at times watered things down a little bit by spreading ourselves perhaps a little bit thin. And the important underlying work programs are, in fact, what is there in Resolution F, and how our planning environment can support the transport, and we can build a better city for the future that doesn't have to be reactive
but can actually grow in a cohesive, coherent way and get people where they need to go. I think that this is a wise opportunity taken to refocus back on what's important and what we as a collective here in Greater Christchurch can all agree on and get together on the same page and get some results. It's time to get some results, and this resolution will hopefully get us closer to that. So I support the resolution as put up here. And I think that in any case, we need to never lose the opportunity for us to get in the room together and talk about our shared goals and aspirations as a metropolitan area, but also need to be very mindful of the fact that our neighbors just on our doorsteps, they're just right there, and we need to bring them into the picture whenever things affect them as well. And I think that this resolution achieves that. So thank you.
Anyone else before I go write a reply? End it up. No, right, Lydia.
I think I'll just clarify a few things. And, in point C, where it says mana whenua, that is on purpose. It doesn't say tront, it says mana whenua, because that is the level of conversation that needs to happen here. And I recognise that. I also want to be clear that this isn't a full stop here. This isn't throwing everything out. But it's giving direction to our Chief Executive Advisory Group to develop options for us to discuss. I think that mid-2027 is too late. We went through the Martin Jenkins, the review last triennium. We couldn't address it at the last meeting. And, this is just going to float around until mid-2027 where we might address it then, and I actually just think that's too late. We have an opportunity to address it now and actually take a leadership role and own this and move forward and recognise that we need to move forward. I know that it's a hard discussion. Change is always hard. And, the world we live in, everything is changing around us. But I prefer to be a maker of my own destiny and own this rather than meandering along for another 12 months. I think I really look forward to the report coming back. I think that's going to be a great discussion.
No, it's not normal but thank you for the opportunity. But Lydia's said it all really well, so thank you.
Right. Moment of truth. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, in light of that, we have one more item on the agenda, which is the report back on the Joint Housing Action Plan. At John's request, if you could give us just a 5-minute break to reset, then we'll pick that up, and then we'll be done for the day. Thank you. Right, thank you, everyone. Sorry for that extended 5-minute break, but I'm sure it was greatly appreciated. Yeah. Okay, final item of the day is the Joint Housing Action Plan report back, which is listed as a workshop. And John and Liz White, we're in your hands. John's moved to the other end of the table.
Through your chair, yes. I have actually literally moved chairs, and I just thought, given to assist me probably in my mental gymnastics and probably just to demonstrate some flexibility, I've come down here as it's easier for us to do this in tandem together rather than me awkwardly trying to see across the table without my glasses with Liz and effectively kind of talk through this with you. We have a clear purpose. Sorry, I'm just giving through. Got a few screens and papers in front of me too to help me in that gymnastics. I'll probably first just step back one step before getting into this. Liz White has, alongside me, she's been supporting the work of the partnership in the completion of the Phase 2 work and is the principal of Liz White Planning. The purpose here today, clearly, I think we've kind of looked at a variety of things to further scope. That came from a decision by this committee back in May last year. Time has changed, even times have changed today. So we'll do our best to kind of shape it in the right way in the current context. But really, I think ultimately the intent doesn't change. I want to present the further scoping and what we've found, but also importantly, get your very direct feedback, probably in addition to what we've already heard around the table today on other items around what happens with the work around the Joint Housing Action Plan from this point onwards. There's 3 questions. We will touch on those, but what I'm going to probably do is slightly different is step through the key parts of the presentation between Liz and I, and then also then open up and just go through those questions, and we'll take the mood of the room in terms of how much time we really dedicate to those questions. Bringing this right back to the housing problem, the work under the Joint Housing Action Plan, when it was endorsed by all partners back in 2024, I think really highlighted the housing system is really complex, as demonstrated by the number of various blue bubbles and call-outs on this diagram. But really what the focus of the Joint Housing Action Plan is in terms of the housing problem, is around the urban growth related driven housing needs and the problem within Greater Christchurch. There are obviously other aspects that could be focused, but this is the focus of the plan. Through Phase 2, we did a bit of further work to understand what that looked like, just to kind of get a current view. We knew that Stats NZ had come out with recent 2023 census data and really trying to understand that. And really, I suppose, what it comes down to in terms of the problem is that, more recently, housing affordability has improved for owner-occupiers and, to a lesser extent, middle-income households who rent. Housing stress for these groups has eased, as average household incomes have increased faster than average rents, while slower house price growth has also contributed to improved housing affordability for home ownership. And that's a positive, and probably demonstrated in some of the numbers and the articles that you see day to day in terms of people migrating to Greater Christchurch to live, as well as obviously the benefits that come with that as well. However, the households with the greatest need, this is what we're trying to pick up here, greatest need still remain under significant housing stress, with incomes not having increased at the same level or materially relative to those rents. So, as we grow, become more prosperous, people are being left behind, and that is going to increase over time. It exists, and it's going to be exacerbated by growth over time as well. Some of the stats that start to talk to that, and that picture here, I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but suffice to say, it's trying to demonstrate that point. The work in the Joint Housing Action Plan, we're not focused on the housing system overall, as I touched on. Over on the right here, this is some work that was completed through the investigations of Phase 1. Over on the right-hand side, you see the private market, so private rentals, private ownership, which I just touched on in terms of how they're performing or how they're faring at the moment. And then at far end, you've got emergency housing and homelessness at that far left end of the spectrum. In terms of where we are on the housing spectrum and continuum, is really this work is really focused in the middle, which is social housing as well as affordable housing, and that includes assisted rentals and assisted ownership as well. And you can kind of see those stepping stones, almost to those bars at the top. That is really, I suppose, indicative of the intent to step through and help support households progress ideally towards the housing market, the private housing market, through the work. An example of what we're talking about, nuts and bolts, what does social and affordable housing look like? This is just an example just to have in your mind versus numbers and charts, etc. This is really what it starts to look like as well. Quite a modern one, delivered through Otatahi Community Housing Trust and partners as well. And probably just demonstrates it's a mix of different tenures as well, rather than solely social housing or affordable housing. It's a combination of that as well. Back in phase one, we identified these number of levers. Again, not going to dwell on them. They exist and they have probably been influenced and changed since they was the first devised and shared with the previous committee, but they ring true in terms of how partners may influence affordable and social housing in particular. Some of the economic development and an initial indicative economic assessment that was completed as phase one started to give a sense of how difficult and how what the potential yield could be for various actions or options at that stage, which we'll sort of circle back, or Liz will circle back to a little bit more to about yield when we get into that further scoping, but just saying there's a bit of rigour here. And bringing it back to this point, we're really trying to have this funnel of like narrowing that focus down. I think it's really key and crucial about what we do. As a refresher, and probably for those that are new or in the incoming committee, this is the list of actions that was endorsed back in May 2025 by the committee. The colour coding was originally to indicate different tranches of work, but ultimately, as this work started to progress last year, realised actually we need to bring it back to the committee as a package in order to then have that consideration by partners before having any considerations with annual plans, long-term plans as well. So that's really the crux here as well, why you see you have a bit more of that important in that omnibus as well. There's a few other slides that I'll talk about. There has been a change in context. We've really, I think, been reflecting on that and actioning that in terms of a number of the resolutions here today already. But I would say that, you know, this was a point in time, as I sort of touched on at the start of this workshop presentation. Things have changed. Those include around reforms, the proposal around rate capping. There's been changes in how community housing can be funded in terms of the Community Housing Funding Agency. As well as in terms of how the government is looking to invest as well with the Ministry of Housing and Development, led by the government, in terms of being a more active purchaser. So understanding what the problem or the needs is for housing and then how that can be delivered against through the connection of funding. So really using that as the lever for it, as demonstrated by the Flexible Fund with 40 to 50 places for the Christchurch area. That's to give you a bit of a picture from where we are. And then really, I think I'll pass over to Liz and we'll step through where we've gotten to in terms of the further scoping that has been completed. But fair to say that we've taken this as far as, I think, reasonable, you know, and really took on board the committee's decision at that time back in May to say, don't spend a lot of time, just do enough to bring this back to this committee for consideration. And that's what we've done in terms of following that brief through. I'll pass over to Liz to touch through on the scope too.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to focus on these two slides. So you'll see that these are a summary, I guess, of the actions that were previously endorsed, that we've looked at in further detail. And this is a summary of the larger report that's in the agenda. I'm just going to try and step you through each of these options, give you enough detail without going into too much detail. I guess a key thing with the phase two scoping was really to look a bit closer at the cost. So in the first phase, I think kind of looked at yields, didn't so much look at the cost associated with each option. So the purpose of this further scoping was to kind of tease out the see how much bang you get for your buck for each of these options. And then the other thing is that, and it's in more detail in the full report, but looking at the yield, where that's quantifiable, looking at splitting that across the different areas or breaking it down across the different territorial authority areas as well. And for some of these, we can't quantify, I guess, the likely yield, but kind of, I guess, scaling it or looking at it comparative to some of the others. And that's basically represented in this table. So the first action was around exploring the support for mana whenua to help bring forward affordable housing proposals. So in particular for this, we looked at what kind of role or roles would be needed to connect mana whenua to affordable housing opportunities and essentially help lead them through the process of considering the opportunity. So this option is essentially an add-on or a complementary action, so it would work alongside some of the other actions in terms of where there are affordable or social housing proposals, and kind of basically being able to have someone who essentially can help augment that from the mana whenua perspective, so to help assist with bringing forward those proposals. You'll see the cost there is low. When this was looked at, it was sort of seen that it's probably a role that fits within existing organisations. It's more of an expansion of existing roles. And also, I guess, in terms of the yield, it's not one that's quantifiable, but I think it's important to note this would kind of be an add-on. So it's an action that can be undertaken in combination with other actions. So hard to quantify, but it would be additional, essentially, to the other yield estimates. So stepping down to option 2.2, so this was about assessing development potential for affordable housing, and this related to surplus sites. So there were potential surplus sites owned by councils of all the partner councils that were identified in phase 1. Phase 2 was essentially taking the next step further, looking at a bit more detail about the viability of that for social or affordable housing, and then looking at the ways in which that might be prioritised. And in particular, we looked at the opportunities for peppercorn leases of that land and or potentially discounted sales. So the cost and the yield is obviously dependent to some extent on that, but the key thing, I guess, with the cost is that it's not a financial outlay, but it is a reduction in income. So obviously, if it's a peppercorn lease, you're not getting the money from the sale of that land. You are getting the ongoing rates payments. If you're discounting the sale of the land, then obviously you're losing whatever the discount is that you would apply. And I guess the yield is relative to that as well, but is considered to be moderate. I think through that second phase, it was sort of identified that of all the surplus sites that are potentially suitable, that it would be sort of up to a maximum of 320. The third one there is about coordinated advocacy. Again, this is kind of a complementary action. It's an add-on. It's also an action that could be undertaken, I guess, to try and gain more levers that can be used by the partnership. Very hard to quantify that because obviously it depends how effective your advocacy is. But I guess what we looked at is kind of what would be the mechanics, I guess, of this. So basically it involves establishing an advocacy strategy, identifying the key messages, who you're going to target with that messaging, and then there's a time cost, I guess, in terms of actually then, building relationships and talking to those parties that you're trying to influence. So low cost, hard to say what the yield is, but again, see that probably as an add-on action to assist further. The last action on that slide down the bottom, 2.4, making social and affordable housing a priority consideration for surplus land. So this is similar to action 2.2, but is slightly different. So 2.2 was looking at kind of the current surplus sites that have been identified, and a sort of a one-off, I guess, if you were to basically use them or look at using them for affordable housing. 2.4 is more on an ongoing basis, so it's more around the policy and process changes that you might put in place basically to prioritise, so where surplus land is identified into the future, having a sort of a priority given to the use of that land for social and affordable housing. Again, sort of low to moderate costs associated with that. Again, it's a reduction in income if you're doing a peppercorn lease or a discounted sale approach. And then there's some also additional costs just with amending policies and processes, although that's it fits well, I think, within existing processes. It's just updating that slightly to reflect the priority, and a low to moderate yield impact relative to other options.
Probably just the other thing and add to point out the difference between looking at surplus sites in Action 2.2 and this one is this is more the incremental and systematizing of that kind of review of, do these sites have the potential for affordable housing as they come up incrementally as partners review their overall portfolios, versus necessarily looking as a whole of saying we've got a number of surplus sites and let's catalyse those almost as a big bang one-off, which is effectively what 2.2 is, and hence probably to see the differences in some of the weighting that comes through from that in terms of costs as well as the yield or impact.
Cool. So the next action is targeted rates. So this is based on essentially taking a contribution from the Greater Christchurch area. Obviously, a key thing with this one is that the government's announced rates caps. So this as an option becomes probably less viable because you obviously have to do that within the overall cap. The other thing is that the government's announced some potential changes to the purpose of local government. So while we've had advice that says you could strike a targeted rate under the current, legal framework, conscious that that might be more difficult or not available, essentially, if that purpose of local government's narrowed. It does have quite a moderate impact, but obviously it has that higher risk associated with it. Action 2.6 is one that we essentially didn't investigate because of the changes that came about since the endorsement of actions. It was just around assessing the need for an external housing investment attraction role, but with the establishment of the Community Housing Funding Agency, that wasn't seen as a sort of a gap anymore that needed to be looked at. Action 2.7 was around looking at a value capture mechanism. That's also sometimes referred to as inclusionary housing. Looking into the costs of that, we looked at that under the current RM system, and particularly with Queenstown Lakes, who'd looked to do something similar, implement that through their plan. Very, very high cost to do that, but probably more importantly, really high level of risk or uncertainty that would actually go through, and that's based on the current RM system. So that's the problem that Queenstown Lakes had. And we know that it's probably quite controversial. Just looking at the planning bill, it doesn't look to be a sort of a mechanism that's really been made available through that. So it does have a very high potential yield associated with it. So essentially it's allowing for when the value of land sort of uplifts because there's additional housing opportunities given, whether that's through intensification or through rezoning. It's sort of allowing for some of the value uplift to be taken and used towards affordable housing. Would have a very high yield, don't really see it being kind of viable, under the proposed planning system. So if this is sort of an option the committee is interested in pursuing, it would probably need to be advocating for it to be, for some sort of mechanism to be put in place, whether it's through the planning bill or through some sort of other development levy process. So we kind of see this as probably not an option that's on the table to implement right away, but it was probably an option that is more in that advocacy realm of saying if it's something that you want to be able or want to have as an option to advocate for that. Lastly, we looked at just development incentives and discounts. So looking at discounted resource consent fees and discounted building consent fees and rates remission for community housing providers or affordable housing. Both of those, the cost associated with that is essentially a reduction in income. So obviously that's relative to the discount or the remission. And the impact of those is low or sort of low to moderate comparative to the other options. Again, depends on the level of discount.
We've got a number of key, I think, insights highlighted there and summarised there from the work in phase 2, which I'll let you to leave in and read at your leisure. I think the one that's bolded is the one that we're kind of most keen to, I think, discuss with this committee in terms of really understanding what that funneling down looks like as well. And rather than on the presentation, as included in your agenda packs, stepped out those questions, what I might do is just touch on some of the important factors, how that could play out, and then I think we'll go back to the questions, if that's through you, Chair, if that's acceptable. I'm getting a nod, that's good. So through the work, obviously you saw that very colourful table where we've assessed the relative costs and yields of the various actions for phase 2, and sort of understand that scoping of there. Really, I think what we looked at are going, actually, that's how to make sense of this and how to support decision making, direction setting through this committee, and any decisions through partner organisations as well. And really, ultimately, these are the factors that we kind of came up with and thought through. These are the most important. We've touched on certainty already, which is number 3, but in terms of effectiveness of how does it actually address the problem, in terms of what it produces and any action, the efficiency, which goes then into what your relative costs are, particularly the effort of officers, certainty, which we've touched on as well. Long-term sustainability, I mean, that's a real consideration, particularly within the proposal for rate capping in particular, but also in the current fiscal environment. And then collaboration, how do we do this consistently? So as one housing market, we're effectively addressing the same problem at the same time and giving some consistency to the various providers as well as the community as a whole. What this then looks like, rather than seeing all effectively 2.1 through to 2.8 in the actions and pick and mix, this is effectively what it starts to look like. If you really want to focus on greatest impact, then there's a host of actions there that could be considered, and there's a relatively high yield that comes with that. There's also a high degree of risk or uncertainty that also comes with those as well, as Liz has just touched on. The second one is around minimising upfront financial costs. Obviously, that's a real prescient issue for everyone and will continue to be so. And therefore, we've presented a combination of actions that could be considered through that, and a much different yield as a result of that too, just reflecting about how we manage that. And the last one is around pursuing certainty as well, which kind of reflects through some of those factors, and really you start to see a much reduced, but also a much smaller range of actions that would then be progressed. What I'll do there, and just land there, I'm going to not hit the microphone first with, go back to those questions and really, I think, hone in on that conversation with the committee and take any questions from there. Sorry, this is the very manual version of having to flip the questions of the committee there. I definitely heard some points on earlier items around appetite, around what to progress, but also really keen, I think, for feedback from the committee members around the work of phase 2 completion.
Anyone want to hazard answers for John?
Or ask questions.
Or ask questions. I think what I would ask, recognising that frankly NZTA has no role here, so this is his chair, is in light of the discussion we had in earlier items, really focusing in on, and it doesn't have to be today, but what are the best components out of phase 2 that individual partners are likely to be able to pick up and progress, given the clearly expressed desire, earlier in the meeting, to focus the work of this committee in on the transport items. So unlikely to progress significant pieces of this work forward.
And I think that's a really important point. Let's just create a bit of room to see if there was any other kind of additions there from the committee members. But I think, based on that, Chair, I think unless there's any other further contributions, I think the silence is telling. I think that, I'm happy to read in between the lines on that one too, and I think we've got where we've got in terms of completing the work of phase 2.
Superb, thank you. Right, any other questions for John before I move on to the recommendation that's in the pack? And in terms of the recommendation that's in the pack, I think we only move forward with the first half of that, which is the reception and noting of the presentation as opposed to any recommendation about forward work program, because that is subsumed in the request to SEAG that was made earlier in the meeting. Yep, cool, perfect. Okay, so the recommendation from officers is that the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee receives and notes the Joint Housing Action Plan Phase 2 workshop presentation and more detailed scoping report. Do I have a mover? Joe, seconder, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Nope. Great. Okay. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right. Excellent. Right. That concludes the formal business of today's meeting. I declare the formal meeting closed at 16 minutes past 11, and we'll close with karakia. Kia whakairea te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai, homie, huie, tākie. Next meetings, sit down for the 12th of June. Thanks, everyone.